Bonus Episode 2, Social Media. In the last episode, we looked at the crucial role that Fox has played in the degradation of our political system. Here we'll look at another key and related contributor, social media. But we can't understand the role of social media without understanding how it's been used by Russian intelligence. The Republican story is that big tech and the government have conspired to help the Democrats. As is so often the case, the opposite is the true story. Republicans have cooperated with Russian exploitation of social media. Here's some quick background. For a long time, the GOP have depended on what we used to call wedge issues, or what's referred to now as the culture wars, because those are the issues that are emotionally polarizing. So they work great for Fox and, as we'll see, social media, because the policies that Republicans want, like tax cuts for billionaires and corporations, are not popular. Therefore, they use these hot-button wedge issues like same-sex marriage and immigration to distract voters and rile up their base for turnout and fundraising purposes. But Republicans also have to explain why their policies are unpopular. And to do that, they've turned repeatedly to the twin boogeymen. One is the pinko professors who brainwash our youth, but the other one is the liberal media. And the modern spin on this that they've been using lately is that social media is also biased. And so they like to go on Fox and beat up on big tech corporations, especially if they're based in San Francisco. A little more context. Corporations themselves are machines to extract maximum profit and minimize personal responsibility. Musk, Zuckerberg, and Trump all have social media corporations that use algorithms, which are just rules to tell the software what to do, and increasingly artificial intelligence to extract and monopolize our attention and then convert that attention into money. Almost all of the revenue for those corporations comes from selling ad, that is, selling our attention and then our data that we give them all the time. They also sell that data and our attention to other corporations to enable them, in turn, to more effectively manipulate us, using some of the same techniques that casinos have evolved to keep people engaged. Social media has discovered that the way to do it is through emotion, especially fear and anger. And as a bonus, social media corporations have discovered they don't even have to pay anyone to create this emotional content. So-called influencers, like the celebrities of old, are people who don't really know anything, but are well known for being well known. And it's really easy to look at the statistics that the social media generates in order to tweak the content for maximum emotional effect. And then to keep users hooked, the algorithms monitor what you like and will feed you incrementally more outrageous versions of that with no kind of correcting moderation, which is perfect for Trump, who has now racked up over 30,000 documented lies. And this increasingly outrageous content steadily divides our tribe from the demonized them, eventually creating an alternative dystopic reality. So if you watch a lot of Fox News or you use a lot of social media, you'll find that young black men are looting our stores and burning our cities. You'll believe that Biden had not the lowest unemployment in decades, but the highest. Ukraine started the war, not Russia, etc., etc. Consequently, social media was extremely useful for boosting Trump's biggest campaign advantages, like the open border nonsense. The Haitians are eating pets, and there's a migrant crime wave. So let's go back and see how this media bias story has been important in our recent history. To understand that, we have to look at the infamous Hunter Biden laptop, the conspiracy theory that the deep state government is collaborating with big tech to suppress the truth. You might recall that Trump's lawyer and fixer Rudy Giuliani went to Ukraine during the 2020 election to dig up dirt on the so-called Biden crime family. Russian intelligence identifies him as a useful idiot. That's actually the technical term, meaning they realize that they can use him to funnel disinformation into Trump's inner circle. Now, Biden's son Hunter had joined the board of a natural gas company, Burisma, in Ukraine, that was actually hacked by Russian intelligence. And there was an investigator of government corruption that the Biden administration and the EU got fired because he himself was corrupt. But somehow, going through the bizarro world looking glass, it all gets reversed. So Biden gets accused of firing the investigator because he was going to reveal his corruption. Not true. No evidence has ever been found that Biden and Hunter had any kind of corrupt dealings, as we'll see shortly. Trump leans on the Ukrainian President Zelensky to declare that his government is investigating Biden corruption. And when he refuses to do this on that perfect phone call, Trump cuts off the anti-tank weapons that Ukraine needs to fight Russia. A little more useful background. Russian intelligence has a standard dirty trick called hack and dump. It involves stealing data such as records and the emails, then releasing them. But what they'll often do is seed in some fake documents along with all the real ones in order to give them credibility. So in October 2020, on the eve of the November election, the intelligence community was watching for just those kind of Russian dirty tricks. In fact, they had just used them on Macron in the French election. When the mysterious laptop showed up, a letter signed by 51 former U.S. intelligence officials warned that it had, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation, end quote. On top of the intelligence community warning, when other reputable news sources could not verify any of the information on the laptop, which had been published in Rupert Murdoch's New York Post tabloid, the social media companies like Facebook, who, by the way, have a policy that they don't publish information that's been stolen or hacked, temporarily avoided boosting it. But of course, Fox and the Republicans screamed election interference and that they were being silenced by big bad tech. The Hunter Biden laptop story was used endlessly by yet another of the Republican oversight investigation committees that was trying to prove that Biden was corrupt and in fact tried to impeach him. Again, they never could produce any evidence. And embarrassingly, two of their main witnesses turned out to be backed by Russian intelligence. Alexander Smirnov was paid $600,000 to feed Russian disinformation on the Bidens to the Comer-Jordan impeachment effort. The other witness, Tony Babinski, had ties to a Putin ally and oligarch, Viktor Veckelsberg, who repeatedly tried to manipulate U.S. policy on Russian sanctions and on Ukraine. So as noted, exactly the opposite of what the Republicans argue about media bias is true. Social media does not slant news to benefit the Democrats. In fact, Facebook offered to partner with both the political campaigns because they wanted to test and expand how their platform could be used to influence people. The Trump campaign accepted their offer to help, and the Hillary campaign said, no thank you. And we can't go into it here, but Google Cambridge Analytica, a company created by Robert Mercer, who gave $10 million to the then-broke Trump campaign. Cambridge Analytica basically does influence campaigns and dirty tricks. Steve Bannon was on the board. And one of their big successes was actually in suppressing the vote. Not surprisingly, Russia was an early adopter of social media. They've been doing dirty tricks to influence campaigns since the Cold War, but they could never have dreamed of the capabilities that social media offered to them. Here's kind of a timeline for how that worked. In the lead-up to the campaign in June 2016, there was the infamous Trump Tower meeting, which Don Jr. and campaign manager Paul Manafort pretended was about Russian adoptions. But in reality, the Russians were offering opposition research, that is, dirt on Hillary Clinton. Don Jr. said, quote, I love it, end quote. By the way, you might remember that Trump claimed repeatedly that he had no business dealings in Russia during that campaign, when we now know that Trump was in active negotiations for a Trump Tower in Moscow. In the following month, Trump asked the Russians to find Hillary Clinton's missing emails, and on that very day, Russian intelligence hacked into the Democratic Committee server. In July, Trump was claiming the hacked emails show that Hillary had rigged the primary election against Bernie Sanders. And then in early October was the infamous Access Hollywood grab them by the pussy video, which was devastating to the Trump campaign. Desperate, they started leaning on Roger Stone, infamous dirty trickster from the Nixon era, to find out why WikiLeaks was not releasing more damaging, hacked information on the Democrats. Several weeks later, on October 28th, only 11 days before the election, because of this information coming out, FBI Director James Comey breaks policy to announce that he's reopening the investigation of Hillary's use of a private email server. By the way, her predecessor as Secretary of State, Colin Powell, had also used a private server and was good enough to say so publicly, but that didn't matter. But the emails was a problem over and over again, and that may have caused enough confusion to, in fact, throw the election to Trump. Several years later, a Senate report, among others, showed that Russia was actively engaged in the election to help Trump. Manafort, who, by the way, got a corrupt pro-Putin dictator elected in Ukraine before Zelensky, gave internal polls to Russia, which presumably helped them refine their social media disinformation. After the election, Russian disinformation efforts shifted to QAnon. They amplified it on social media, and it took on a life of its own. We'll see how it contributes heavily to the January 6th insurrection. Initially, Trump distanced himself from QAnon, but he comes fairly quickly to embrace it, and it no doubt boosts the Trump personality cult. He's portrayed as the hero who's going to lead the storm, which is the day of retribution for the horrible, cannibal, pedophile sex ring that Hillary Clinton is the head of downstairs in a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. They're all going to be rounded up and executed. Justice will be done. There were actually QAnon candidates, people running for office who were big boosters of the conspiracy, notably Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and they will come to form the Troll Caucus, along with others like Louis Gohmert, Paul Gosar, and Andy Biggs, all of whom were really big in the whole Stop the Steal Sedition Caucus. This Troll Caucus presents a kind of scary model for the future, because they abdicate all pretense of legislating in favor of cultivating an online presence, followers, and donors, which can then be leveraged for Fox appearances. They basically traffic in misinformation and conspiracy, and again, social media is big on fear and anger, and algorithms just intensify it all. Facebook had been criticized for allowing Russian interference in the 2016 election, and so they put some safeguards against disinformation in place in 2020. And Twitter also had teams that were deplatforming, that is, booting off bad actors who were spreading COVID disinformation and hate speech. But after the 2020 election, Zuckerberg basically congratulated himself on doing such a great job, and he took down the safeguards in December, which is kind of unfortunate timing because that is when there was that crazy late-night meeting in the White House where Flynn was trying to get Trump to declare martial law, and the Kraken lawyer, Sidney Powell, was trying to get appointed to be special counsel in the Justice Department. When that blew up, Trump threw a Hail Mary pass, and late that night went on Twitter and put out the infamous "Come to D.C. on January 6th. It will be wild." Not only was Facebook used heavily to propagate the notion that the election had been stolen, but it was also actually used logistically to organize people to come to the Capitol. Despite this frenetic and effective use of social media by the right, the GOP, including in their Benghazi-style weaponization oversight hearings, continued to complain, often on social media, that they didn't have free speech because big tech was silencing them. It was one of the reasons why Musk said that he was going to buy Twitter, which kind of started out as a troll, but eventually he made an offer. The courts basically forced him to go through with the deal, and actually after he bought the company, it was worth somewhere between 50 and 80% less, losing $24 billion in value. Musk invited back a bunch of the neo-Nazis and vaccine crazies who had been thrown off the platform, and he in fact specifically invited Trump to come back. Twitter gave Musk a powerful platform to stall legislation or boost a candidate. Social media played a crucial role in the 2024 election. Particularly influential was the manosphere, podcasters who talk about sports, working out, and martial arts. Their shows aren't technically about politics, but right-wing notions often enter in. Joe Rogan is the key example here, with as many as 30 million followers. The Russians spent $10 million trying to recruit manosphere influencers in the election. And so social media in general, and the manosphere in particular, were really helpful in boosting the issues that were useful to Trump, specifically the migrant crime wave nonsense. There was a spike in crime during the first Trump administration, but it had been declining precipitously since then. But it wasn't migrants that were doing the crimes. But then, of course, the Haitians are eating the pets nonsense was heavily promoted by social media. While Harris voters tended to get their information from much more trustworthy sources, like network television and newspapers, Trump and swing voters were far more dependent on social media and therefore exposed to much more misinformation. Right after the election, Zuckerberg follows Musk in elimination of content moderation that would limit disinformation. Not surprisingly, he announces his personal and company rebrand on the Joe Rogan program in early 2025. Interestingly, some years before, Trump had threatened to throw Zuckerberg into jail for life because during the pandemic he had helped people vote, for example, by mail. As part of his rebrand, Zuckerberg gave the Trump inauguration slush fund $1 million, as did a lot of other corporate CEOs, and he showed up for the coronation with all of the other oligarchs. Perhaps in return, Trump has only one piece of legislation that he has any interest in, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which strips food and health care from the poor to give rich oligarchs a tax break. So sad to say, thanks in no small part to social media, the slide to dictatorship in the United States is actually faster than in Russia or Hungary. And so the future's a little hard to predict, especially with the Trump-Musk on and off and on again bromance. But given that Trump in general caters to billionaires and big corporations, it's highly unlikely that there's going to be any regulation on social media as they have in Europe, despite the demonstrated harmful effects on young people in particular and on our political system in general. Moreover, Citizens United dark money will ensure that corporate oligarch influence and its inevitable corruption will only grow, which is why it's essential to pass a 28th Amendment that enshrines that corporations are not people, and money is not speech, and our democracy is not for sale.